Thank you, Devanshi, and welcome you all for this another very interesting and futuristic session on pharma and healthcare. We had almost, I think, 13 sessions on pharma, healthcare, digital health, as well as medical device. And in all this session, one word became constant, or rather constant as well as common, which was coming out. And that word is very important word, especially from healthcare point of view. And that word was hope. We discussed stem cell, we discussed telemedicine, we discussed new medical devices, we discussed 3D printing, robotics, then drones in healthcare, digital health in general. And tomorrow we are going to discuss artificial intelligence and healthcare. So everywhere, one word which came up is that there is an hope. And hope is a very strong word. And before we move on, I'll just spend few seconds on one very interesting story, and a lot of people must be aware of that. That there are four candles, and they were, in a very silent room, and they were all burning. Suddenly, the first candle says, "I'm peace. Nobody needs me. Let me go off." The first candle goes off. The second candle says, "There is no need. People don't need me. People have lost me because I am faith." That candle also goes. The third candle suddenly starts crying, "Okay, there is no need for me because nobody bothers of me for everyone. Nobody loves. I am loved. So I will also go." Out of four, three candles are gone. Suddenly a child comes and sees that only one candle is there and three candles are not burning. Starts crying. And the fourth candle says, "Child, don't bother. I am there. And I will light all remaining three candles, and there will be light because I am hope." This is what the hope is, and that is what I think what we are going to talk today on biobanking, and that is why the topic title also banking for the future. And biobanking has been discussed. I came across one cover page, the front cover page of Time magazine. Exact date is March 23rd, 2009, on annual edition. The title was featuring 10 ideas that are changing in the world. And the fourth idea was biobanks saving your parts. And it further said how saving your parts in some form is definitely going to play a role. Biobanking is the greatest research for developing specific therapies, specific medicines. People call it personalized medicine also, but end of the day, it provides amazing resource to researchers to come out with some specific therapy for tough, stubborn diseases. I was a doctor. Dr. Sangeeta too also will agree with me that nowadays we are seeing so many tough diseases, concept of rare diseases have come, and even in today present times also that we are looking for some kind of solution to a health problem. And that is where possibly the concept of biobanking, which is not just the bank just keeps your money, but then they also do something same way. Biobank also collects samples, but works does a lot on that particular sample and comes out with some amazing results which are going to be helpful in future. But as every healthcare science goes, the biggest challenge here is regulatory, legal, and more ethical and policy concerns and issues, which possibly is bothering this industry or a vertical or a science or a technology. And that is where I think I just asked this question, what exactly the biobank is? And I get an amazing answer from Dr. Sangeeta. It's like elephant and six blind men. What you see, you decide what it is. But the common, it's an elephant. But it is not an elephant in the room, friends. It is an elephant which mails everything from very far distance and comes out winner to provide some solutions to the therapy, giving therapy or a specific therapy for specific disease like oncology. And I'm so happy today that we have two stalwarts, one who moved from US, leaving a illustrious career there to India to do something on this field, started an amazing two companies, as Devanshi mentioned, Saram Life Science and Sapien Bioscience, doing amazing work. That is Dr. Jugnu Jain. And another epitome of dedication, devotion, working at a Tata Memorial Hospital in a pathology department, and heading that department speaks volumes that what work she is doing, what work she must be doing, and how busy she must be keeping. Still, they are with us. So, thank you very much, Dr. Sangeeta and Dr. Jugnum, for being with us. And I have my standard. I used to call them my soldiers, but I think after CISA, they are my commanders. Darren and Shreya with me. So I think it's a very interesting concept. So, Dr. Jugunu, I just wanted to tell everybody what exactly is the biobanking concept? Is there a need, or what is the need, and why it is banking for future? And I'm covering up three questions. So, Jugunu, your take on all these 3 points.
So thank you, Milind. I think it's really nice to have this session today because a lot of people will have the same question that you have as to what is a biobank. A bank, as you said rightly, is a collection of, normally people think money. In this case, we are talking of human samples. Technically, a biobank can have samples of animals, it can have samples of bacteria, it can have samples of virus, or even plants. There are seed banks. Manila, for example, has the Rice Research Institute, which is the seed bank of rice all over the world. And just like any of these areas, it's very important to collect the diversity of disease. And so the sample, along with the data, the patient history, the family history, habits of the person, smoking or non, alcohol or not, what are other diseases they have, what are the medications they have, all of that together comprise one medical record. And that systematic collection or a library of samples and associated data is what is called a biobank. Bio because it is biological samples. Bank because it will have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of such samples. So that is what it is. And why do we do it? Why do we call it for future, as you rightly said? History teaches us a lot of things, right? So unless we know why certain diseases are happening, what are the risk factors, why certain diseases are more prevalent in a certain area, why in certain families you see the same pattern repeating, unless we understand the basis of the disease, we cannot develop ways of diagnosing it early, nor can we find any cures for it or treatments for it, because you need to know what to target, where to target, when to target. So ultimately, what we believe is important is that one should have a very large database of matched sample and data, because without data, the sample is useless. And without sample, data is also of limited utility. And the data should be very detailed. It should be highly curated, and it should have some longitudinal, meaning the same person should have been followed from the start of the disease till the diagnosis, till the treatment, and then the outcomes. And then that forms a very useful record. Like the Framingham risk study that told us that many of the factors of cholesterol, plaque, all of this is important for heart attack. That was done because they had some 25,000 patients that they had followed for 20 years and could see people who were asymptomatic today but became symptomatic later. So, what was in their blood? What was in their urine? What was in their x ray that could have warned you that they are at risk? And then you can go back and address the problem that they were manifesting before they even manifested symptoms of it. So, in a nutshell, a biobank is a huge resource that then in turn enables diagnostics, pharma, biotech, AI, you mentioned AI, digital health. And a very good example of that, which is in the public domain, is the UK Biobank. This was funded by the NHS and Wellcome Trust and so on. And around the same time that we started, they started, And in 5 years, they accumulated 500,000 people's samples. These were normal people between the ages of 40 and 65, but they tracked those people for 5 years, including multiple samples of blood and urine, etc. So again, during the course of those 5 years, some people went on to develop diseases and they had those samples from before they had the disease. So they could look for the needle in the haystack. Why did this develop this disease?
Thank you, Jugnu. Very, very nicely put in a very simple language, and you made a complicated topic in a very simplistic and lucid way. Thank you very much for that. But what I understand, and the doctor in me says that I think biobanking is going to provide a huge resource to develop therapy or medications for some interesting unfortunately, doctors always call certain diseases interesting disease because they don't have solutions. So by reflex, the word interesting, but stubborn diseases which are not easily amenable to therapies. And what I understand from what you explain is that it touches everywhere. It's kind of an omnipresent science. You take any area of ailments or diseases a human can suffer from, biobank can help there. And I'm so happy that we have Dr. Sangeeta and possibly one of the biggest researcher institute on oncology space, which is Tata Memorial Hospital. We swear by that hospital. When I was an ENT surgeon, and the respect I have for that institution is multifold. And managing the entire pathology department, where what you mentioned, Jugnu, the samples, ultimately these samples go to pathology department, and how important the pathology department is for the entire sciences is people like Dr. Sangeeta. And I'm sure in your experience, Dr. Sangeeta, you would have handled so many samples, so many bio things, and worked on that, especially in oncology. So I just want you to tell us what could be the applications of biobanking in general.
In general, it's a huge landscape of applications. And for that, I would go back to the types of biobanks. And as Dr. Jugnu has already mentioned, they are human and non-human biobanks because scope is huge. Now, obviously, we are talking about human biobanks here. Now, here we will start with population-based biobanks, where basically the biobanks are catering to huge populations, maybe confined to the country or the region or even ethnic group, and there they are looking for disease susceptibility. What is exactly causing any prevalent disease in that particular population? So that is one example. The next example is disease-oriented biobanks. Again, there are two types. Again, there is epidemiology or population-based, where they are actually looking for biomarker of exposure. Exposure to what? To any, say, chemical or any biologic agent like virus, what we are dealing with now. So that is disease-oriented biobank. Third example is disease-oriented biobank. I'll give example of our own biobank. I belong to a tertiary cancer center, Tata Memorial Center. And so what we are running is a cancer specialized or cancer specific biobank where we collect tumor tissue, adjacent normal and blood sample. So this is the example. So similarly, there are biobanks dedicated to diabetes mellitus, dedicated to cardiac diseases, so on and so forth. And another example I would like to give is I'll come to stem cell biobanking, where they are actually dealing with regenerative medicine related research. So these are the various applications of biobanking in general.
Yeah, and since you have been dealing with oncology per se, can you just tell us what difference this entire biobanking will make to the entire oncology spectrum, the cancer patients? I think there is a huge future. If you can spend 1 minute or 2 minutes on that.
Yeah, I will see currently the tremendous advances which have happened in the field of oncology, whether the new drugs or new biomarkers, all that has happened on the basis of uh, uh, magnificent research work undertaken on these biospecimens, well
Understood.
characterized, standardized, along with associated data. So the researchers have spent years decoding various mechanisms which were hidden in this treasure. And that's how today we can have very advanced medications to treat cancer, or we have biomarkers which tell us which patient is going to respond to the treatment or how the tumor is going to behave. So that's the result of translational, I mean, that is the success of translational research or translational medicine in
Listen.
today's era.
Thank you very much, and I'm so happy that there was a saying years ago that cancer means cancel, but those days are changing, and that particular statement. I did my masters in '87, and I remember at that time you suffered from and did a lot of head and neck work also. At that time, sometimes it was considered to be a salvage procedure. If we can't do anything, at least remove the mass. That was the thing in '80s. Now things are changing. I'm so happy that so many things are changing. We are seeing so many cases of malignancies coming up, possibly because the diagnoses have increased, and possibly and rare malignancies are also we are seeing. Unusual classic case we saw Irfan Khan.
Yes.
People would not have heard of neuroendocrine tumor, but he unfortunately we lost him to that. That still he managed so well. And so this is what I think generally a great contribution this particular biobanking concept can do. Let me move over to now India now. I think we had a great outline of what exactly the biobanking is. And when it comes to India, and when, as I mentioned, the biggest concerns possibly is the regulations and legalities of this particular science. The word biologic sample to a lawyer suddenly sparks a lot of things. Hey, we are going to be in a deep timeline issue. So I have Darren with us. So Darren, can you just quickly take us how exactly the biobanking is regulated in India? From what I see, I think Jugnu mentioned data. So data is a huge issue. We are sitting on some huge data privacy law coming very soon. If there was no COVID-19, possibly would have got it in next 2-3 months. There could be ethical issues, there could be legal. Can you just give a simple download on how biobanking are regulated in India?
Sure. Thanks, Dr. Tan. And so from a regulatory point of view, we're banking from different aspects. One is the purpose for why you're biobanking. It could be research purposes, it could be commercial purposes. Then also you must look at it from what kind of biological material you're trying to store, because the regulations would vary based on these factors. Now, when you look at blood and blood products, as well as for umbilical cord, you have to look at the Drugs and Cosmetics Act, as well as the Drugs and Cosmetics rules, which provide for certain licensing requirements for running such a bank that deals with blood products, as well as for umbilical cord banking. You need to approach the Central Drug Standard Control Organization to obtain a license to operate such a bank, and you need to follow the conditions of license prescribed under these rules in order to operate that bank. Now, apart from that, if you are dealing with tissues, you will need to get a registration under the Transplantation and Tissues Act, and they specifically cover tissue banking and the various modalities as to how you need to operate a tissue banking or a tissue bank service is covered under this legislation. Then when it comes to the import and export of human biological material, it either depends on whether you are doing it for commercial purposes or you are doing it for research purposes. If you're doing it for commercial purposes, you then turn to the Directorate General of Foreign Trade, which deals with what exactly needs to be done, mostly from a self-declaration point of view, having a material transfer agreement in place with the research institution from abroad, so on and so forth, that you need to get it sorted from the DGFT standpoint. If you're doing it for research purposes, the ICMR, which is the Indian Council of Medical Research, will also play a role in terms of how you can go ahead and get that material transferred, importing. Now, from all biobanking point of view, the overarching principle and guidelines have been laid down under the Indian Council of Medical Research ethical guidelines for biomedical research on human participants, whereby under the 2017 guidelines, an entire chapter has been dedicated for biobanking itself. And it deals with the ethical conundrums. It deals with how the data can be identified, de-identified, anonymized. It also deals with how exactly the consent from the patient should be taken and the standard operating procedures that such banks should put in place. So these broadly cover the guidelines that deal with. From a data privacy point of view, all biologic material will be governed also from a general data privacy point of view, which is currently regulated under the Information Technology Act, as well as the rules that deal with sensitive personal data or information. So as we current framework, medical data, medical records, history, physiological information, and the like are considered to be sensitive personal data or information, which triggers certain consent requirements from collection, storage, transport, transfer, and so on and so forth when it comes to moving this data around. And all of this requires some sort of consent under the current framework. And as you said, Dr. Antani, there is also the new framework that's coming in, which is the Personal Data Protection Bill, which also segregates data into personal data and critical personal data. In all likelihood, the health data and the kind of data that we're looking at from a biobanking perspective may end up in the critical personal data point of view or under the critical personal data. And if it does, then there may be some restrictions on the transport or the cross-border transfer of data, some restrictions on where exactly a copy of these kind of data can be stored. And these are things that are still unraveling, but we do see that there will be a lot of checks and balances put in place when it comes to how data in general, and especially health data, which will affect the biobanking industry as well, be regulated from a upcoming regulation point of view as well. With that, back to you, Dr. Antani.
Thank you, Darren. So I think it seems that though it doesn't appear to be very easy to set up a biobank per se in doing everything, but it doesn't seem to be very impossible or super cumbersome type of work. But it is not a typical bank that, hey, you took the license to start the bank, you opened the bank, and people start queuing up to deposit money and collect money and utilize various instrument a banking system has. This is a different bank, and that is why we call it a banking for future. And who else but Jugnu here? And hats off to you, Jugnu, to come to India. I'm aware of your career and your need in how you were needed in the Boston area, considering your knowledge and research capabilities, and you are in India doing some difference. And I am compelled to ask you, because it's not a cakewalk. It is not just in obtaining a license and approvals, what Darren mentioned, that you fulfill those compliances and you just start the bank and it starts. It doesn't happen. It doesn't look like, honestly speaking. Because I see 2 or 3 phases there. One is, first of all, is collection of samples. The doctor in me says it's a very arduous job. I don't know how things must be happening. Once you collect the samples in your bank, you create a repository type of a thing, which is just a. Remember, it is said that all enzymes are proteins, but all proteins are not enzymes. Same way, bio repository and biobanks are very different. Repository may be a sub part of biobank. So you collect the samples. Then once you collect the samples, you work on samples, or you utilize those samples for, depending upon it's a biological mass of, say, malignancy of breast or ovary, or maybe some tissues of a patient suffering from some other rare diseases. And then you work. And again, it is not a template type of work that you ask your team members, check the box, because every disease is different. Every disease is a different pathology, different morphology, and different etiology. And working on that, and once you work on that, you generate huge data. So, and you do something with data. So what I'm trying to understand, must be a challenging task. It's not must not be an easy task. I don't want to go into the details of setting up the biobank itself. Could be a task, as Darren mentioned. But in the entire biobanking process, what are the challenges you feel are there for collecting samples, utilizing samples, and managing data which you generate. Yeah, Jugnu.
Thank you, Milind. I think Dr. Sangeeta and I are both smiling because we all know how many white hair and loss of hair we've had in this process. And I often say, had I known how difficult it is, perhaps I would not have started. This is absolutely true. Before I get into it, I wanted to make a small addition to what Darren was just saying. The Transplantation of Human Organ Act only applies when you are using tissues for transplantation, not for research purpose. So all the research applications that I will talk about, or Dr. Sangeeta 99% will be talking about, are all governed by basically ICMR. As Darren mentioned, in 2017, they came out with a specific chapter on biobanking, which really clarified some of the gray issues and made it easier for us because we fall fair and square in the non-clinical domain for our biobank. We are not intervening in patient treatment and altering it. We are collecting samples that are typically left over from their routine diagnostic, routine surgical procedures. So even before you set up a biobank, actually there is quite a lot of work to do. You have to set up the fundamentals of what your biobank will store, why will it store it, whom will it share it with, because just to create a biobank and hoard everything for yourself is not right. The patient is giving that material for it to be used for research purpose. So it is an obligation upon us that we must make the most optimal use of that sample and data. So taking the ethical approvals ahead of time from the hospitals that you are working with is important. And a lot goes into taking the ethical approval because you have to then educate them, explain to them, reassure them that you are a bona fide researcher and that you will use it only for the purposes that are okay, that are for benefit of future patients. And that's where the future comes again. So all of those things were important when we were setting up the biobank, that we said we will be a commercial biobank, that these samples will be stored with certain consents and approvals in place. And we defined even the kind of research that would be done using these samples. And we had definite policies on how we will share these samples and what kind of legal paperwork we will have in place if we were to share the samples with third parties. And all of that was under the umbrella of how ICMR said you should have an MTA, you should have certain legal language as to who will use the data for what. So some of the biggest challenges that we have encountered are, first of all, because people don't value these samples, they are seen as a liability by most hospitals. They are relegated to the basements and to the worst places. And so when we go in to look for these samples, there is a lot of cleaning up, cataloging, reorganization, quality checks. A lot of stuff has to be done because occasionally things will be missing. Physically, tissues will be missing from the hospital because they have been given back to the patient, they were used up in some research for some thesis, etc. So we go in with a sort of like a detective mind frame and we are piecing a puzzle for which many pieces are missing. That is one part. The physical samples are often not in pristine condition. Then the second, even more important challenge comes that the data is very badly scattered and not always available. It can be in pathology registers and they like to write by hand, so it is not digitized. It can be in some medical record department where some parts have been stored, but not everything. Some will be in some IT database, but that software has changed every 3 to 4 years. So God forbid the same patient came back 4 years later, there will be a new ID for that patient and you can't even figure out if it's the same patient who came back. So it's a labor of love and it's a lot of manual labor because you have to have people who are intelligent and are looking at the data from the point of view of if it's breast cancer, we know life expectancy could be about 8 years, 10 years, 20 years. So they will track by age, by name, by doctor, old records and scattered records from radiology department, chemo department, and sort of piece a single record, which is very important. Then the cost of doing all of this is very high. We don't get much support for that. So how to create a sustainable business model is something that not only we in India, but the whole world is grappling with. Because when Dr. Sangeeta and I have been to international biobank meetings, we hear so many biobanks that are going out of business because they put in a lot of beautiful procedures, they collected a lot of data, they collected the samples, but they didn't know how to monetize it. So all of these aspects are a huge challenge. And I think until we understand that there is a lot of value and we are willing to fund it, knowing that today's funding will give you reward tomorrow, the future of biobank itself will also be in risk.
Yeah. So Jugnu, I think before I move on to my next question to Dr. Sangeeta, I have one question, and you just mentioned in your last line on funding. You need funding, honestly speaking, and such an amazing concept closing down possibly because of the funding, and not having funding could be one of the important causes for not utilizing the services or data. So how exact funding works in biobanking space? If you can quickly tell us, whether it is a donation or a grant from universities or government organizations like ICMR or DBT, Department of Biotechnology, or global organizations like NIH or somebody else reaching out, or
Most
the possibility of private investments like private equity players or VC backing you up.
Yeah, so most of the biobanks in the world tend to be academic biobanks and usually associated with hospitals just like Tata Memorials. So they are eligible for government funding and they follow the more traditional method that it is understood there is inherent value in their collecting the samples and it is going to fund research internally. It fuels research. So most of the samples are kept, they are funded by government or for not-for-profits. And most of the samples are used for internal research for training purposes or future PhDs, MDs, and so on. There are a few biobanks in the world which are commercial, which were funded by either angels or by typically not VCs in India, one would say maybe PEs. In India, we are the only commercial biobank that I know of. So most of them are funded by government and not for profit, like Wellcome Trust funded the UK Biobank in a big way. And many of the disease advocacy groups like Multiple Sclerosis Foundation, MD, other diseases stepped in to fund something. In fact, just yesterday, ICMR and DBT have announced that ILS Bhubaneswar will be the biobank head, quote unquote, biobank head for COVID. And there will be 16 institutions overall within India, all academic again, that will become the repositories for COVID-19. So again, DBT will fund them and ICMR will fund them. People like us would be open to funding by VCs and PEs because we have a sustainable business model. And there is a company called Asterland in England that got bought out because they had very good data. And similarly, there is a company in US which had sequenced some 500,000 patients samples and data and had a license model. So anybody wanting to access the data had a yearly license, just like you would have a license to Microsoft Office. So most of the biobanks tend to be government or NIH or those kinds of funding. And this is where I feel many of them struggle because they will get an input of money initially to create them, and sustenance becomes difficult and utility is low. So if there are better public-private partnerships which allow good repositories in the public domain to be used for private industry, I think both parties will benefit. industry suffers enormously from not having access to good quality, well annotated samples. I'll just give you an example. Last year, the Medicines Catapult division in UK, MDC, came out with a white paper on what are the top 5 challenges for biotech pharma in UK taking their products or developing their products. One of the 5 things was lack of access to human patient samples and data. And why? It's not that UK does not have biobanks. UK has more than 100 biobanks. But again, majority are academic. And those companies in UK have talked about the fact that many of those academic companies funded by public money are not willing to share samples with industry because they somehow feel that industry is not pure.
Commercial angle. Okay, I totally understand your point, and I think it is a question of last mile. And when it comes to funding, I believe that it's going to be a push and pull, both mechanism. It is going to. You touched upon a very important point on PPP model, public-private partnership model, collaboration with government organizations, and taking it to, as you rightly mentioned, that lack of commercial biobank in per se would be a challenge on not taking anything ahead. And that is where I think we see a lot of models of biobanking prevalent in India and globally also. So, Dr. Sangeeta, I just want to pick your brain. I'm sorry for that. But can you just tell us about various models that are prevalent in India, mainly in India, and a little bit about global also?
Yeah, I'll start with very basic model in the sense that biobanking is basically a very old activity, but biorepository science is a young discipline. So let's go back to our old activity. So you will have in the olden days investigators with their own little -80 freezers in their backyard. So that is a very old-fashioned biobank, we can say, because basically they were storing tissues. But of course, it was never an organized collection. So that is one very basic model, which is I wouldn't call a proper model. But so that is investigator driven. Next is institution driven. So that is what we have. And I must add here that when we started way back in 2003, it was ICMR who provided seed funding. And then since 2008, we have been on our own. That is Tata Memorial Center, which is our central government organization. So we are getting funding that way. It's a government funding. So, so this is an institution-based model. Then you have in some countries national repositories, and there are many feeder centers which feed into this national repository. Then another structure is federated kind of structure where there are small biorepositories which are individual entities and but they provide the data to the central repository. So that is kind of federated structure. And then there are some project-driven, project-specific biobanks. And like in clinical trial setting, you will have pharma companies which collect biospecimens because they are interested in developing biomarkers. So there is some project-driven, clinical trial-driven. So these are various kinds of or types of, these are the models which exist. And if you go funding wise, there are different models. That is commercial biobanks, which are prevalent abroad, or government funding or public funding or mixed kind of funding. So these are various kinds of biobanks which exist.
Understood. I think very interesting. And if we take off India, what is the more like you mentioned about Tata Memorial, and Jugnu also mentioned about perhaps her biobank is the only possible commercial biobank. So do you see being at the helm of the most important department of a central government premium institute treating oncology? What do you see the need of commercial or a private biobank, as well as the PPP model, which Jugnu just mentioned? What is your take on that?
See, the
Model point of view, yeah.
yeah, as I said, biobanking in a very organized way, it's a very young discipline worldwide also, and especially in India. And you see most of the biorepositories or biobanks located in the government institutions, and very rare example like what Dr. Jugnu is having. Now, the problem with biobank is you right in the beginning introduced biobank as an elephant. I would call it a white elephant. It's very difficult to sustain a biobank. I mean, I might say that, I mean, ICMR did give us seed funding, but even there were a lot of problems and irregular kind of funding, and the flow of money was extremely irregular and sometimes very meager. But we had to sustain ourselves. So that's when Tata Memorial Center supported us. Now, the problem is if there is public private partnership, then this sustainability will be, it would be easier for biobanks to sustain themselves because it is financial sustainability is a huge problem for any biobank anywhere in the world because it is a white elephant because there are three different aspects to biobanking. One is operational, where you are actually collecting and storing. One aspect is administrative, where you require administrative staff. And the third is ethical and legal issues. So you require staff, you require equipment, you require a lot of activities. And there are many other processes which are going on in the biobank simultaneously. And all that requires money, and that is a problem. And that's why public-private partnership is important.
Very, very well said. And I think I would want Shreya to come on board now. And we have been working on not exactly a biobank, but we have worked on a lot of laws and regulations related to biologic samples and some a kind of biobanking type of situation also. And Darren did mention about the broad regulatory framework which is governing biobanking. Jugnu ultimately said that it is going to be ICMR, which is going to be the main organization that governs and takes the shots. So, Shreya, I want you to tell us and all the participants that what should be the ideal regulation. What I understand from Jugnu and Sangeeta is that it's a great science, but possibly a dark cloud with silver lining. That is what I see. Chand mein bhi daag hai, so it's okay. But what should be the ideal regulation, or I can slightly put it in a different way. What role government can play? Like Sangeeta and Jugnu both mentioned about, rather emphasized about need for public-private partnership, and you can also compare it with in countries like Europe or North America, broadly speaking, where biobanking is reasonably established compared to India. So can you compare also?
Thank you, Dr. Antani. So, and honestly, I feel like we'll just sound like a broken record over multiple CSAPs. But really, the biggest thing that we can do is have a specific legislation that governs health data and genomic data. And that's a big gap that India is currently facing on the data privacy front. So that's one, and I'll elaborate on that a little bit later on. But from a comparison perspective, I was just looking at guidelines from the United States, United Kingdom, and Canada. The difference, and I was very surprised by this as well, but the difference does not appear to be in as much on how biobanking is regulated, because in each country's, and even in India, the model is similar. There's a regulatory authority of sorts, and in some cases, like in Canada, legislation is divided between the central government and the state governments, or the way Canada refers it, the federal and the provincial governments. But the biggest difference, it seems, as to why these markets are so different and more advanced in India in terms of biobanking is government support and like a much stronger culture of academia and science. And I think those are the bigger differences as opposed to regulation. And so if India is looking to advance biobanking and take it to the next level, these are some of the aspects that we would need to focus on how the government can be more supportive. Because as you've spoken so far in this CSEP on, how a lot of this is for academic purposes and is expensive and probably does not, and it's hard to have a commercially viable business model right off the gate, like right from the beginning. I think the focus definitely needs to be on the ways in which the government can support this initiative. And so one of the ways in which the government may, and this is where we probably come to how regulation might be helpful, is A, to regulate health data in a more specific way. So even when we speak about the personal data protection bill, it's better than what currently exists because there's a clear definition of what health data is and what genomic data is, and it regulates that data specifically as opposed to vaguely regulating personal information, which is definitely a step up from what we have right now. But it's largely not good enough because it does not help create a repository. So the way it works in the United Kingdom, and I think when we eventually frame regulations, we would want it to work even better, is that in the United Kingdom, data collection or genomic data collection is regulated by the General Data Privacy Regulation, or the GDPR, which is a European Union-wide data privacy law. Now, the PDP framework is a little similar to GDPR in that when you are collecting data from the patient, it is personally identifiable at that point. So it's possible to identify who the patient is based on the data. And then subsequently, the party that is collecting the data in the UK, and that's how the Wellcome Trust also works, if I'm not mistaken, about how they anonymize the data, and that's how it's public, right? So a similar business model would be viable in India, even now under India's current regulation, and in the future under the Personal Data Protection Bill. The key aspect for why this would work is because anonymized data is not regulated at all in India, because it's considered to be non-personal data that cannot be used to identify any given individual. So as long as that's one of the ways in which India can be similar and can develop similarly to UK. But I think the real way to take it to the next step is to have a to be able to publicly share this data or to publicly share genomic data. And there are two big issues with that. First, that data protection regulation everywhere is very consent oriented and very consent based. And the way to like maybe advance this area in India would be to move away from patient consent as the be all and end all of data collection, because often maybe patients don't understand exactly the ways in which data may or may not be used, and so we can have maybe a different framework for data sharing for research purposes. That's one. And the second thing that we can take into consideration, and the government took like vague steps in this regard, is to define the purposes for which genomic data can be used. So very recently, in 2019, the Indian government introduced the DNA use of the technology bill. But unfortunately, the use of that bill is very limited to the use of genomic data for the purposes of investigating crimes and for giving evidence in courtrooms. But it was the first time that the Indian government made an effort to have a central repository of genomic data, even though it was not for medical research purposes. But something along the lines of the DNA bill, which has the regulatory authority to regulate genomic data and talks about how genomic data can be used for public research, would definitely go a long way in making biobanking more viable. So on this note, over to you, Dr. Nandani.
I like your positive thinking. We're definitely is going to play a huge role. So, Jukunu, I'll come back to you. We have few interesting questions also, but we do have time. Now, you mentioned about application of artificial intelligence and other technology. So, can you just shed some light quickly on what could be the role of new age technologies in biobanking?
Oh, the possibilities are enormous. So we were talking about genomics. I'll just mention briefly, since Shreya left off with that. These days, genomics has gone way beyond just looking at genes that are transcribed or whatever. You can look at non-transcribed areas. You have so much risk assessment happening. Everybody knows Angelina Jolie's story. There is so much use, even FFPE blocks, the old blocks that old-time sequencers used to not like. There are new machines and technologies coming out that can use that very effectively. And the dilemma for genomics is becoming that often you can have, so many petabytes or terabytes of data, and only a small number of those are actionable. So today we may have drugs only for 3 genes that are mutated, but you may get information about another 10 for which right now you don't know what to do. So we often struggle with the fact as to what should be returned back to the doctor or the patient. This is one of the areas I think that people should get together and think about. How should data be used for general knowledge deriving? That is one, genomics. So I think there are many frontiers in genomics that we have to address. What to do with data today that we don't know how to use. Who should share it? Like Shreya mentioned, should it be in the public domain? Because people can be traced back partly based on the data. So even if you anonymize, it's only up to a point. We come to other areas like AI and ML. So we have collated a lot of breast cancer data over the last 7-8 years, and we are working with a very well-known company, Tech Mahindra. This is the first time we are getting into AI, and it's kind of the first time when we started talking to them, first time that they were entering into, they didn't know biobank and what are samples and why. They like everything the same from one patient to the other, and we all know no two patients are the same. So they were struggling with biology and we were struggling with all the AI. But I think we have to close the loop somewhere. So we're working on predicting which breast cancer patients will have a worse outcome and which will have a better outcome. So for those that have a worse outcome, you need to have better monitoring, more aggressive treatment, perhaps many things in parallel compared to doing it sequentially. So a lot of treatment paradigms will come out of this kind of data. Equally important is also knowing the efficacy. What treatment regimens have equal or better efficacy for which kinds of patients? I know I'm getting into personalized medicine in a way. That is one of the biggest applications of biobank, personalization of medicine, because you will have samples from 2 sets of patients and you can start to analyze why does this patient respond, why does this patient not respond. So using data, using AI, using algorithms, machine learning to start to segregate and stratify patients to they say this patient benefits better by this patient benefits better by that. We also have what is called a live biobank. So we collect live patient tissue from surgical suites. We culture the actual tissue like tumors, and we use that for testing new drugs. The drug could be small molecule, the drug could be a herbal extract. We are working a lot these days with companies into herbals. The drug could be a monoclonal antibody like biosimilars and so on. The drug could be a nano formulation, many different things. This usually gives you better results because you're using actual patient sample. You're not using some reductionist model of a cell line or something. And you're also representing the diversity of patients because you are testing directly from patient sample and no two patient samples will be exactly the same. So you are more confident that if your drug or your antibody or your extract is working in 10 different breast cancer patient samples, it has higher possibility, better translation into clinical efficacy. So that is another area where live banks use patient cells to test new drugs, new markers, etc. Then there are other areas which are also in liquid biopsy. So this word has been used a lot. What is liquid biopsy? It's some kind of a biospecimen that is a window into a patient's body and disease. It could be blood, it could be urine, it could be tears, it could be bone marrow, it could be cerebrospinal fluid, it could be synovial fluid, it could be pleural fluid from lung cancer patients. So many of these fluids are using single cell genomic technology, circulating tumor cells, many techniques that are miniaturizing such that you can work with very, very small amount of material.
Understood.
And of course, there is digital pathology, which Dr. Sangeeta can talk about better than I can probably, where you use the image itself. Image is very rich in data, and that again is used for building AI and ML-led usable healthcare solutions to optimize therapy for certain patients. You've heard about now there are biobanks that microbiome, our gut microbiome. When people used to say, think with your gut, my gut instinct says that there is some truth to that. Your gut also knows a lot of things. So the gut microbiome also governs response to drugs, very new stuff. There are also biobanks that store feces from patients who have good metabolic and digestive systems, and feces from those normal people has been known to cure people who have inflammatory bowel disease and ulcerative colitis type of things. So there are many new techniques and applications coming up that are still to be implemented in India, I feel.
Thank you very much. And I think that is what I think another ray of hope, that what I understood so far, that many dots need to be connected in the entire biobanking concept, and application of new age technology and the technology you mentioned are possibly the medium which is going to connect all the missing dots in the entire process. So quickly, I think we have 2 minutes more, but I have got another 5-6 minutes extra because we have a few questions. But before we move on to questions, I have one question for Dr. Sangeeta. Jugnu mentioned about personalized medicine, and you also mentioned about translational research. We can talk. You can talk for 7 hours on that, but I'm giving you 2 minutes to talk on that. If you can, very in a simplistic way, if you have to explain the participants what is translational medicine and what is personalized medicine and what role biobanking is playing in that, maybe 2-3 minutes if you can do, it would be great.
Yeah, translational medicine is what? It's what the research which we are undertaking when we are taking those research findings to patient. That is translational medicine. And personalized medicine is we are shifting away from that traditional concept of one drug fits all, that kind of concept, to it's a paradigm shift to individualized kind of treatment, and individualized treatment based on individual characteristics of that particular patient and the tumors. I mean, I'm an oncologist, so I'm coming to cancer again.
The classic example is oncology only.
This has been possible in personalized in oncology, basically because of decoding of human genome, which happened in the year 2003. So we know about the genetic sequences, and it was published in the year in April 2003. Second factor is that there is a huge advancement in IT healthcare. So there is exchange of data between various countries, nations, various research groups. That is possible. And there has been the biorepositories have contributed immensely to development of personalized medicine because huge biorepositories or big ones abroad, they joined hands. So they had very well characterized biospecimens with associated data. So this decoding of human genome, biorepositories, and immense advancement of healthcare IT, that has contributed to development of personalized medicine. So we have better drugs, specific drugs for specific diseases. We have better dosing of drugs based on this particular, say, genetic information. Then selection of patients, selection of drugs is better, and even the drug discovery is improved. And that is based on all these three factors. And that is all about personalized medicine.
I think very simple way, and I think that is where I think the prognosis of the patient is going to be far better than what it should have been.
It is going to respond to the treatment, whether that particular drug, because cancer has many phases. Like
Exactly.
breast cancer will respond to a particular drug, proportion will not respond, proportion will develop toxicity, proportion will develop benefits as well as toxicity. So who is going to benefit, who is not going to benefit? So that
So in very simple language, what I understand that suppose there are two patients suffering from the identical disease. I'm using the word identical morphology, pathology, staging, say two patients of CA breast with the science would have a personalized medication considering their entire genetic profile plus profiling everything, and that is going to give them much better improvement than the conventional medication. That's a huge thing. So I think I'll just ask you the last question to both of you. I want you to answer only in one line, not more than one line. Where do you see biobanking in India? I see the doctor in me is so excited today, and no, doctor is pushing and lawyer is pulling, possibly in me, that somewhere something is missing, which is going to happen. But if you have to sum up in one line, where do you see future of biobanking in India? Let me start with you, Sangeeta, first.
Well, biobanks are being developed in government institutions, but they are in silos and they need to join hands, and there has to be networking and public-private partnership for sustainability. That's
Perfect.
the plan.
Jugnu, your turn. Jugnu, your turn.
She
One
said,
line. One
yes,
line.
Dr. Sangeeta has said rightly. I think it's good because India is still somewhat at a nascent stage. We've had a couple of meetings where several people who are very passionate about how we should together evolve a common standard way of sharing samples are working together. So coming back to hope, my hope is that we will evolve a more mutually beneficial relationship among the few large biobanks. And I think the team, which is very important in each of our places, perhaps we can have people going between biobanks also to see the best practices of each other. So I think I have very high hopes. We should work together with the government also to remove these silos, as Dr. Sangeeta is saying. That's very important.
Thank you very much. I think what is coming out is yes, compete and cooperate, rather cooperate and collaborate. That is what I think is coming out very well. And we have two, three, four very interesting questions also. But before I move on to questions, we have Nishit Bhai, our founder of the firm. And I have never seen anybody who loves technology. He breathes technology and supports technology. And we talked about a lot of interesting things, and you talked about technology. So before I move on to question, Nishit bhai, just can you on a few seconds give your comments on this?
Well, I think personally, I feel that it's a collaborative approach that would really help, because as you all mentioned that there's a lot of silos around, and in silos we don't really grow that well. You develop that deep knowledge, but it cannot be scaled up because we are siloed. And I believe that we'll have to make some amends in terms of regulations, in terms of some of the policy changes. I think to facilitate, you know, and also clarity on data sharing and stuff like that. So, but in the meanwhile, this is a very important activity, and I think somewhere along the line, whatever may be the situation, we have to find some solution. And most important thing is not finding solutions very quickly, because I think there is an opportunity, as I heard in the conversation, that the human samples are more available perhaps in India than in England. you know so I think there was some lack of availability of samples. That's what I understood in some ways. So India has a large pool of people and more ability to do all kind of trials. So we have both, supply, demand, everything. I think we have talent, of course, and even IT, so IT sector. So if you put all the supply chain together in this biobanking, I think we have very good environment. I think we just need to put our probably regulatory, environment in place and collaborate.
Thank you. Thank you very much,
I want to
Nishit bhai.
thank Sangeeta and Jugnu very much for coming on board today. But this is very useful education to lot of us and lot of people around. I think more awareness, I think more result. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nishit bhai, on your comments. As always, crisp and important. So we'll quickly move on to 3-4 questions we have, and I think I would want Sangeeta or Jugnu to answer this in a very short way because we are just literally running short of time. We just 2-3 minutes. One question is from Suresh Pusala that can you shed some light on free cell banking such as lung lavage cells, not necessarily tissues, not necessarily from patients alone? Maybe quick answer. We will take all these questions offline also, but you can simply touch upon. Jugnu, you want to touch upon?
We haven't really done that. I think I would let Dr. Sangeeta take this one. I think I'm sure they are very familiar with lung specimens, free cell.
Please.
We are into tissue banking, and we have not done this either.
Okay. So we will come back to you on this. Now there is a comment by Amok Bhatnagar that most of the data, and I think Jugnu and Sangeeta both touched upon, that he looked for NGS data for COVID patient in association with annotation, but could not find it because it is not in public domain. And that is what one of the important point you both mentioned that certain data are not there. Now there is one question from Sri Voleti. Are there any NGOs that fund biobanking?
I'm not aware of. And if
Yes.
you are aware, let us know.
Yeah, so far, I totally agree. We also do have a social sector practice, but we have done a lot of grant agreement. But somebody funding in biobanking, I have not seen. There could be some sitting somewhere, but that is where I think the challenge is that people need to know what biobanking is, and that is where people are going to come out. There is one quick question from
Can I
Bharti.
just, can
Sure,
I
sure,
add
please.
quickly, Milind? I think there is a role to be played to educate, like you were saying, because there are a few disease organizations. There is a rare disease organization, there is thalassemia, there is autism. So some of these organizations, I think if there was a way to bring together and tell them that biobanking is so important, then apart from helping patients and caregivers, perhaps this could be a part of their research activities. I think it is an opportunity there.
Yeah. Thank you. So there is a question, could be a very long answer, but from Bharti Mittal from Avestha Jain in Bangalore. So they are also looking at starting possibly a biorepository or biobank, how it can happen. I don't want to go, but she's asking one specific question. Is there any Indian association of biobanks in India? I see only one commercial which is sitting before us, and then see Tata Memorial Center sitting before us. But is there an association or an organization which he wants to know?
Not in India, but we all are members.
Asking about India only because they want to start.
We are members of ISBER, but there is no association within India.
I think more and more people should enter and let there be more people so that associations can be formed. And on I think how to set up biobank is a long topic. We will take this offline. There is a question from Suresh Kusala. I would put it more as a comment that why international biobanks can be harmonized. Like UK faced problem and India had plenty. So why can't UK and India align? So is there a need for reinventing the entire wheel? Maybe yes, but again, what Jugnu mentioned is knowledge, education, and awareness, and how important it is, and that is where, and I mentioned about the harmonized regulations across the world would play significant role in creating such kind of harmonization and collaboration. That's what I personally feel. If you want to add for a second or two, Jugnu, you can add, or Sangeeta, you can add.
See, the purpose, the biobank for the purpose of setting up that particular biobank has to match with the other biobank. The regulations have to be in consonant with each other. So there are so many factors. So that's the very reason why the biobanks across the two continents or nations, they can't, I mean, that's the difficulty for them to come together. But all of us can get connected at ISBER, which is a major biobank consortium.
Yeah. So I think we have
I think
many
again,
questions. Yeah, please go ahead.
I think again, there is not as much awareness. So in the West, typically they were used to getting samples from their own biobanks and so on. And in fact, I would be correct to say that most of the innovation in health for developing drugs and diagnostics happens abroad. This is true. How many new drugs have come out of India? So India was not having such kinds of biobanks, and nor was there so much of a need for it. So people sitting in UK, companies sitting in US, Canada will not think of India as a source of specimens and good quality data. So it's a matter of us doing a better job at being in these international meetings and telling people that we are as good as any, that we are following all the right guidelines, that we have our own ethics committees in place, and that we are willing to work with you. So that's where ICMR has streamlined some of these issues that were dogging us in the past, where we could not collaborate with people abroad. Some of that barrier has been removed.
Good. I think with that, I think there are so many questions. So what I will do, we will take it offline, and I promise all participants who have asked very interesting questions, we will share the question with all the panelists and give you the answers on offline mode. But so before I complete, let me just say, what I understood from this long discussion. Now, honestly, I thought we will finish in 45 minutes and have a lot of discussion, but I think it became so interesting that, but what comes out, and I again repeating that, yes, the time has come for connecting the dots, and I'm happy that ICMR is playing huge role, and what comes out is, as I mentioned, it's a small dark cloud with silver line, and some kind of PPP evolution of PPP model or collaborations with government will play a huge role. So there is a hope. The doctor in me says there is a hope, and definitely this science, this industry, this vertical is going to move very fast. And we did not touch, but it could have played role in COVID-19 type of situation also. So what I just think, because when there is hope, there is miracle. And I, being a doctor, I always believed in miracles. And in my professional career of 15 years, I have seen 3 miracles happening where I was very sure that this patient is not going to survive, but somehow patient survived. And that is why it is said that hope is the most important thing, because hope matters. Because it is said that in presence of hope, faith is born. In presence of faith, love becomes a possibility. And presence of love, miracles happen. And that miracle is going to be biobanking. And I'm sure if at all we have similar type of pandemic in 2-3 years time, I wish it doesn't happen, but at that time, because of the biobanking in India and world, we would have answered to such therapies for sure. With that, thank you very much, Jugnu and Sangeeta, Darren, Shreya, and Nishit Bhai for sharing your thoughts and knowledge, and thank you all the participants for attending in a large number for this interesting topic. With that, we will end this, and I invite Devanshi for further announcements. Thank you so much.